So today we are going to start with a new topic, that is friction. Friction. In class 11, friction is of two types. You have to study the two types of friction. That is static friction, and the second one is kinetic friction. Static friction and kinetic friction. Beta, static friction, the name itself tells us static. When the body is at rest, the friction which is applied when the body is at rest. When the body is at rest, that time the friction which is being applied, that is called as static friction. Whereas when the body is in motion, then the friction applied on the body is called as kinetic friction. You can also call it dynamic friction. Dynamic friction. Okay? Kinetic friction or dynamic friction. Bacha, first of all, we are going to start with static friction. Suppose there is a body. Suppose there is a body of mass m. Suppose there is a body of mass m, and you are applying, which is kept on the surface, and a force F is being applied on the body. A force F is being applied on the body, and the body remains at rest. The body is not moving. The body is not changing its position. It means one of the force you applied in this direction. At the same time, the surface is providing the force in this direction. That is a frictional force. Because since this time this body is at rest, then the type of friction is called as static friction. But as slowly as you will increase the amount of force, the amount of applied force, gradually the force F will also in opposite direction will increase up to a certain limit. This small f force, that is frictional force, static frictional force, that will increase gradually until the body will start moving. But beta, till the time, if the force is being increased, at the time when the body is just about to move, at that time the maximum value of static friction is being applied. Yes or no? That maximum value of static friction, maximum value of static friction is called as limiting friction. Limiting friction. Yes or no? Limiting friction denoted by FL. FL is denoted. The maximum value of static friction is called as limiting friction denoted by small fl. Bacha, the thing we should know. For example, I am going to again explain this in the form of example. Suppose there is a body. Initially, you are going to apply the force of 2 Newton on this body. Okay. At the same time, body remains at rest. Why the body will remain at rest? Because at that time the frictional force which is being applied here is equals to 2 Newton. Okay, that is frictional force, static friction. Now I have told this increase the force from 2 to you have just applied 3. Okay, you have increased the force. Again, the frictional force will also increase. From 2 to 3. Now, again, you have increased the applied force. This is the applied force, and this is frictional force. When the applied force is being increased from 3 से लेके हो गया 5, if it is increased from 3 to 5, then the frictional force is also 5 Newton. And this is, suppose, this frictional force is the limit. This is the maximum frictional force which can be applied on this body. This is the maximum frictional force which can be applied on this body. Okay. After this, if the more force will be applied from the external source, then the body will be in motion. Then the body will be about to move. So this 5 Newton is the maximum value of static friction. Yes or no? The maximum value of static friction is called as limiting friction. So in this case, limiting friction is equals to 5 5 Newton. Bacha, this 5 Newton is done till here. In this, whenever the force is being applied, for example, static friction, the maximum value of static friction is called as limiting friction. Frictional is denoted by a small f, okay, Fs, okay, and whenever, suppose the body is at rest, suppose the body is kept here and it is at rest, what is the amount of frictional force being applied here? Zero. Because no external source, no opposing force is required, because no one is trying to move that particular body. No one is trying to move that particular body in a certain direction. Yes or no? Yes. So the frictional force in this case will be how much? Zero. Why it is zero? No force is being applied in order to move the body. Yes or no? Move on. Now let's move on. This static friction force is directly proportional to the reactional force. Whenever a body is kept on the surface, whenever the body is kept on the surface, this is the mass of the body and this is the force mg which is being applied on the ground, and at the same time a reactional force is applied by the ground according to Newton's third law. According to Newton's third law, Fs is directly proportional to R. When this Fs is directly proportional to R, let's understand the concept. Means more the value of R, more will be the frictional force. Higher the value of R, higher will be the what? Frictional force. But the maximum value of static friction is called as limiting friction. Therefore, Fs can also be written as what? Fl. Maximum value is proportional to Fl is also what? Fs. Fl is also what? Fs. So maximum value of static friction is Fl. So Fl is directly proportional to R. Whenever this proportionality sign is removed, we are using a constant that is called as Fl is equals to mu SR. Mu SR will tell you this mu is called as coefficient of static friction. Coefficient of static friction, which is unitless and dimensionless quantity. The unit of mu s. What is mu s? Coefficient of static friction. Okay. The coefficient of static friction in here we have done. Mu s is coefficient of static friction. Static friction. It is unitless and dimensionless. Okay, it is unitless and dimensionless quantity. Now Fl is equals to mu SR, and whenever you are going to write this, in case of static friction, Fs is less than or equal to mu S R. Yeah, that is also Fl. Fs is less than equals to what? Mu SR, because limiting friction is the maximum value of static friction. So static friction will be always smaller than limiting friction, and limiting friction is equals to what? Mu s into R. Is it clear to all? Any doubts here? No. Now let's move to kinetic friction data. Kinetic friction deals with what? Kinetic friction is the friction which is being applied on the body. Kinetic friction is the friction which is being applied on the body when the body is under motion. For example, when the car is moving, then also friction is being applied. On that particular car. Yes or no? So at that time, whatever the frictional force which is being applied on car is called as dynamic friction or kinetic friction. This is called as dynamic friction or kinetic friction. So bacha, here also, which is denoted by dynamic friction. In this, it is denoted by Fk, small fk, okay, which is directly proportional to R. It is also directly proportional to the reactional force. It is also proportional to what? Reactional force. Fk is proportional to R. But if Fk is proportional to R, when the proportionality sign will be removed, Fk is equals to what? mu k r, where mu k is coefficient of friction, kinetic friction, coefficient of kinetic friction, okay, coefficient of kinetic friction. It is also unitless and dimensionless, Now in this case, till here we have done. So unitless and dimensionless. So bacha, one important note was here that always kinetic friction is smaller than static friction, means limiting friction, not static friction. If you use static friction, then it might be that sometimes the value of static friction is smaller. Yes or no? The value of static friction can be 0 also. The value of static friction can be 0, but it is always smaller than limiting friction. The value of kinetic friction, Fk, is always smaller than Fl. Yes or no? The static friction is always, limiting friction is always greater than kinetic friction. Okay? Any doubts still here? No. So bacha, friction plays a very vital role in our lives. First of all, the very vital role is, first of all, suppose you are moving on a road, without friction you can't move. Suppose if this surface would become frictionless, what would happen then? Suppose we can't move from one place to another without friction. As one person says that friction is the opposition in the motion. Yes, the term is opposition, means it is resisting the change, flow, motion. What is friction? Friction is resisting the motion. It stops the relative motion from between the two bodies. Okay? And without friction we cannot move also, because for motion friction is must. Okay? Now the next topic is coming. In frictional, so for example, whenever you are going to take a turn, whenever you are going to take a sharp turn on the road, if the friction would not be there, what would happen? You just go and collide with the front wall, might be. Suppose you are taking a turn like this. What would happen? If the friction would not be there, for example, this is a road, your cycle is going like this, you are trying to turn here. You cannot turn, you will just moving like this. You cannot turn without friction. Okay? I will be telling you in the circular motion the similar things. And this Fk is less than Fl, and static friction and kinetic friction, both kinetic friction will be applied here when the body is turning. Frictional force is being applied at the turn. Frictional force is being applied when the body is turning. There are so many varieties of examples for this. Let's move further. Let's have a question. A body of mass 20 kg, is resting on the surface, whose coefficient of static friction is 0.2 and coefficient of kinetic friction is 0.15. Calculate the value of acceleration in the following cases. Calculate the value of acceleration, static friction, kinetic friction, if the external force F1 is equals to 15 Newton and F2 is equals to, F1 again, this is the first part, and when the F1 is equals to 40 Newton. In which of the case static friction will be applied, and in which case kinetic friction will be applied, and what is the acceleration at that particular instant? Just you have to tell me that. Okay, let's see. I'm going to solve this question for you. Beta, this is a body of mass 20 kg. Whenever a body of mass 20 kg is kept on the surface, force weight mg will be act in downward direction. Yes or no? At the same time, the reactional force will be applied in upward direction. A reactional force is being applied on the upward direction. R is equals to mg. We can easily write a solution from here. Solution R is equals to how much? Mg. Whenever we are going to solve this question, just find out the value of limiting friction. Initially find out what? The value of limiting friction. Fl is equals to mu SR. Yes or no? What is the maximum force a body can resist? This body can be resisting on this particular surface. Mu SR. What is the value of mu S? 0.2. 0.2 into 200. Let the value of GB 10. Let the value of GB 10. 200. 0.2 into 200 will be how much? 40 Newton. 40 Newton. How much it is? 40 Newton. So, bacha, in first case, this is the maximum value which can be applied as a static friction. Limiting friction is how much? 40 Newton. And in first case, how much force is being applied? 15 Newton. Then what is the value of the static friction? Then what is the value of the static friction? 15. Arey bacha, I told you initially. If the force F1 is equals to 15 Newton, 15 Newton, तो अपोजिशन में 40 का 40 थोड़ी लगा दोगे. You are not going to apply all the 40. जितनी सेना आएगी उतनी सेना उतारोगे. Yes or no? Yes sir. The 15 Newton force is being applied. You are going to apply a resistive force of how much Newton? The force surface 15 Newton. This Fs is equals to how much? 15 Newton. What is the net force on the body? 0. Acceleration will be how much? 0. पहला case done. The next case, 40 Newton. Now in this case, you have already calculated the initial phase. The limiting friction of this on this particular body will be how much? 40 Newton. So in this case also, the net force on the body will be 0. Acceleration will be 0. The third one is coming. F1 is equals to, let it be 50 Newton. Okay. How much force we have applied? 50 Newton. Now you know right from the starting, the maximum static friction in static condition can be how much Newton? 40 Newton. Yes or no? Maximum force can be 40 Newton. तो मतलब 50 Newton दिखाई दिया. We have seen the 50 Newton. It means the body will move. It means what? The body will move. If the body will move, then which friction is going to be applied? Kinetic friction. So what is the value of kinetic friction? Fk. Fk is equals to mu k. Mu kr. Mu kr is how much? 0.15 into 200. That will be 30 Newton. Yes or no? So when the body will be in motion, the kinetic friction will be how much? 30 Newton. Now the frictional force which is being applied on the body is how much? 30 Newton. And what is the external force being applied on the body? 15 Newton. So if the body is like this, the 50 Newton force is applied in this direction, and in this direction how much force? 30 Newton. So what is the net force in this direction? 20 Newton. So net force F net is equals to 20 Newton. So beta F net is equals to mass into acceleration. F net is 20, mass is 20. Mass is 20 and acceleration A. 20 cut. Acceleration is 1 meter per second square. Yes or no? Yes. Any doubts anyone?